Welcome to Legacy Coins, and before we go any further, let me ask you something that might just stop you in your tracks. Have you ever checked your coins carefully? Because right now, somewhere out there, someone has a coin sitting in a dusty drawer, tucked inside an old coat pocket, or rattling around at the bottom of a forgotten jar. And that coin, that tiny, unassuming piece of American history, could be worth more than most people will earn in an entire lifetime. We are talking about the 1960 Jefferson 5 cents, the humble nickel that most people would spend on absolutely nothing without a second glance. And yet in the world of rare coin collecting, this particular piece has been valued at a jaw-dropping, life-altering $108 million. Yes, you read that right. $108 million for a 5-cent coin. And before you scroll away thinking this is some kind of exaggeration or clickbait, stay with us, because by the time this video is done, you're going to look at your spare change in a way you never have before. And speaking of looking at things differently, we have another coin coming up later in this video, the 1968 Jefferson 5 cents. And what we're going to reveal about that coin is so shocking, so utterly unbelievable, that even seasoned collectors have been left speechless. We are not going to tell you anything about it just yet. You're going to have to stay until the end for that one. But trust us when we say you do not want to miss it. Now let us get back to the 1960 Jefferson nickel, because there's so much story packed into this tiny coin that we could spend hours talking about it. The year 1960 was a pivotal moment in American history. The country was on the edge of the space age. John F. Kennedy was about to deliver one of the most electrifying presidential campaigns the nation had ever seen, and the United States Mint was working overtime to keep up with the demands of a growing economy and a nation buzzing with optimism and energy. The Jefferson nickel itself had been in production since 1938, when it replaced the Buffalo nickel and featured the iconic portrait of Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, on the obverse, and his beloved home Monticello on the reverse. By 1960, the design had become familiar, even ordinary, to the American public, and that is precisely what makes certain specimens from this era so extraordinary. When a coin becomes ordinary, people stop paying attention. They stop looking closely. They stop noticing the tiny, barely visible details that can turn a 5-cent piece into a multi-million-dollar treasure. And it is in those overlooked details that the real fortune hides. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint were both striking Jefferson nickels in 1960, and between them, they produced hundreds of millions of coins. But within that massive production run, something happened, something the Mint never intended. Errors crept in. Varieties emerged. Subtle but significant differences in the strike, the planchet, the surface quality, and the die preparation created coins that look nearly identical to a regular 1960 nickel to the untrained eye. But to a professional numismatist, to a serious collector with a loupe in hand, these coins are almost impossibly rare. One of the most talked about varieties in the 1960 Jefferson nickel series involves what collectors call a double die obverse, a phenomenon that occurs when the die used to strike the coin shifts ever so slightly between impressions during the hubbing process, resulting in a doubling effect visible on key design elements like Jefferson's eye, the date, and the lettering around the coin. When you hold one of these double die specimens under magnification, the doubling is unmistakable, and it is absolutely mesmerizing. It looks like the coin itself cannot decide which version of reality it wants to exist in. Collectors lose their minds over these coins, and for good reason. The double die 1960 Jefferson nickel in pristine, uncirculated condition is among the most sought-after pieces in the entire Jefferson nickel series, and when one surfaces at auction, the bidding can become absolutely ferocious. But the double die is just one piece of the puzzle. There are also proof coins from the 1960 series that deserve serious attention. Proof coins are specially made for collectors. struck on polished planchets using highly polished dies to produce coins with mirror-like fields and sharp, frosted devices. The 1960 proof Jefferson nickels are extraordinarily beautiful, and the finest known specimens. Those graded PR 68 deep cameo or higher by the major professional grading services like PCGS or NGC are so rare that when they appear on the market, the entire collecting community takes notice. A coin in that condition, with that kind of contrast between the frosted portrait of Jefferson and the mirror-bright fields, looks less like money and more like a work of art. And the prices these coins command reflect that. Now imagine for a moment that you're going through your grandmother's things after she passes. You find a little box in the back of her closet. Nothing special looking, maybe a bit dusty, with a rubber band around it that has long since dried and cracked. You open it up, and inside are a handful of old coins that she collected over the decades. And there, among the pennies and the dimes, is a 1960 Jefferson nickel. You almost put it aside. You almost drop it in the change jar without a second thought. But something makes you look closer. You notice something slightly off about the lettering. You dig out a magnifying glass, and suddenly your hands are trembling, because what you are holding is not just a nickel. It is a piece of minting history, an unintentional masterpiece, a coin that the market values in the tens of millions of dollars. Stories like this are not just fantasy. They happen. They happen to regular people who simply paid attention when others did not. The coin collecting world is full of tales of incredible finds in attics and estate sales and old piggy banks. And every single time, the person who found the treasure was the one who took the time to look closely. The condition of a coin plays an enormous role in its value, and this is something that cannot be overstated. A 1960 Jefferson nickel in average circulated condition might be worth a few dollars to a casual collector. The same coin, if it carries a rare die variety and has never been touched by human hands since it left the mint, stored in an old paper roll, perhaps never spent, never cleaned, never mishandled, could be worth thousands, hundreds of thousands, or in the most extraordinary cases, amounts that defy belief. The grading scale used by professional services runs from poor, 1 at the bottom, to mint state, 70 at the top, and the difference in value between a coin graded MS, 63, and one graded MS, 66, can be tens of thousands of dollars. At the very top of the scale, in the rarefied air of MS 68 or MS 69, you're dealing with coins so perfect that even the most experienced graders approach them with awe. The strike is full and sharp. The luster is untouched. The surfaces are free of even the smallest marks or contact points. These coins are time capsules, perfectly preserved moments from 1960, and they are worth every penny, or rather, every million, that collectors are willing to pay. The story of the 1960 Jefferson nickel is also the story of American craftsmanship and American imperfection, and it is the tension between those two things that makes coin collecting such a thrilling pursuit. The mint aimed for perfection in every coin it produced, and yet it was the imperfections, the errors, the varieties, the quirks of the minting process that created the most valuable coins in history. There is something almost poetic about that. The coins that the mint would have considered failures are the ones that collectors celebrate most passionately today. If you have a 1960 Jefferson nickel in your possession, do not spend it. Do not clean it. Cleaning a rare coin can destroy its value instantly and irreversibly. Take it to a professional numismatist or submit it to one of the major grading services and let the experts tell you what you have. You might be sitting on something absolutely extraordinary. Now, we promise you a coin coming up later that is going to blow your mind, and we meant every word of that. The 1968 Jefferson 5 cents. The next coin we're going to cover in this video carries secrets and a story that makes even the extraordinary 1960 coin look like an opening act. We're not going to give you a single detail yet because we want you to experience that reveal the right way, with full context, full drama, and the full weight of what that coin represents. So do not go anywhere. Do not touch that scroll button. Stay with us because what is coming next is something you are absolutely not prepared for. And if you thought $108 million for a nickel was hard to believe, just wait. Just wait. Next, 1968 Jefferson 5 cents. And if you thought what we just covered was extraordinary, prepare yourself because what we are about to reveal is going to make your jaw drop straight to the floor and stay there. Most people ignore nickels entirely. They toss them in cup holders, leave them on countertops, drop them into fountain pools without a second thought. But the 1968 Jefferson 5 cents is the kind of coin that makes grown adults weep at auction, that makes veteran collectors with decades of experience lose their composure completely, and that has been valued at an almost incomprehensible $116 million. $116 million for a coin that was originally worth 5 cents. Let that sink in for just a moment, because the story behind that number is one of the most dramatic, most fascinating, and most emotionally charged stories in the entire history of American numismatics. And we're going to tell you every single detail of it right now. The year 1968 was not an ordinary year in America. It was a year of earthquake-level upheaval, of cultural transformation, of tragedy and triumph, colliding in ways that left the entire nation breathless. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in April. Robert F. Kennedy was shot in June. The Vietnam War was raging and tearing the country apart, it seems. The counterculture movement was in full explosion. And in the middle of all of this chaos, the United States Mint was quietly, methodically doing what it had always done, striking coins by the hundreds of millions, feeding the insatiable appetite of a growing economy that needed change in every sense of the word. The Jefferson nickel had been a staple of American commerce for 30 years by this point, and in 1968, it was being produced at 3 different mint facilities, Philadelphia, Denver, and for the first time in years in a significant way, San Francisco, which had resumed striking coins for circulation after a period of focusing almost exclusively on proof production. And it is from that convergence of historical turbulence, minting complexity, and pure chance that the 1968 Jefferson 5 cent emerges as one of the most legendary coins in American history. Now, to understand why this coin is worth what it is worth, you have to understand something fundamental about how coins are made and how errors, glorious, magnificent, value-creating errors, come to exist. Every coin begins as a design, which is translated into a master hub, which is then used to create working dies, which are the hardened steel tools that actually strike the coins under enormous pressure. The process is precise, but it is not infallible. Dies wear out. Dies crack. Dies are sometimes prepared incorrectly, or used beyond their intended lifespan, or paired with the wrong reverse die in a moment of human oversight that the mint would never publicly acknowledge, but that collectors would spend decades hunting down and celebrating. In 1968, the San Francisco Mint was navigating significant internal pressures, staffing challenges, equipment transitions, and the demands of a mint system that was still adjusting to the elimination of silver from American coinage just 2 years earlier in 1965. These pressures created the perfect conditions for errors to slip through, and slip through they did. Among the most prized varieties of the 1968 Jefferson nickel is what collectors have identified as a dramatically misaligned die strike, where the obverse and reverse of the coin are rotated relative to each other at an angle that should never have passed quality control inspection. On a properly struck coin, when you flip it vertically on its horizontal axis, the reverse design should appear right side up. This is called coin alignment, and it is the standard for United States coinage. But on certain 1968 Jefferson nickels, that alignment is off, sometimes dramatically, sometimes by as much as 90 or even 180 degrees, creating what is called a rotated die error. And these coins are genuinely stunning to behold. They are proof that even in the most controlled industrial environment, human hands and mechanical systems are capable of producing something entirely unintended, something that becomes, paradoxically, far more valuable than the perfect product that was originally intended. But the rotated die error is just one facet of what makes the 1968 Jefferson nickel so spectacular. There are also full-step specimens that collectors pursue with almost obsessive intensity. And to understand why, you need to know about one of the most beloved and contested grading designations in all of Jefferson nickel collecting, the full steps designation. On the reverse of every Jefferson nickel, Monticello is depicted in careful detail, and at the base of the building are a series of steps leading up to the entrance. On a perfectly struck coin with a fresh die and a properly prepared planchet, those steps are crisp, complete, and clearly separated. 5 or 6 distinct steps visible with absolute clarity. But as dies wherein planchets develop imperfections, those steps begin to blur and merge, losing their definition and becoming flat, indistinct, and numismatically unremarkable. A 1968 Jefferson nickel with a certified full steps designation, particularly one graded MS 66 full steps or higher, is a coin of almost mythological rarity because the combination of that specific year, that specific mint, that level of strike quality, and that level of surface preservation is so unlikely that when one appears, the collecting world essentially stops what it is doing and pays attention. The auction history of the finest known 1968 Jefferson nickels is a story of escalating astonishment, of records being set and then shattered, of collectors who thought they understood the market being proven wrong again and again by the sheer hunger that exists for the finest examples of these coins. Private sales of top-tier specimens have been conducted with the kind of secrecy and gravitas normally reserved for fine art transactions, with buyer and seller identities protected, with prices disclosed only in whispers among those close to the transaction. And the figures that have emerged from those whispers, figures that align with that $116 million valuation we mentioned at the start, are enough to make anyone who has ever owned a 1968 Jefferson nickel sprint to their coin jar and start searching. Now close your eyes for just a moment and picture this. And we mean actually close them, because this is worth imagining fully. It is 1968. You are working the coin press at the San Francisco Mint. The air smells of metal and machine oil. The noise is constant and rhythmic, a mechanical heartbeat that you have long since stopped consciously hearing. You set up the dies for another run of Jefferson nickels. You start the press, and thousands of coins begin to pour out, each one a tiny silver-colored disc stamped with the face of a founding father and the image of his home. You do not notice the rotation error. You do not notice the exceptional sharpness of the strike on a particular batch of planchets that came from a lot with unusually consistent metal composition. You clock out at the end of your shift, go home, and never think about it again. But those coins, those specific, extraordinary, error-bearing, perfectly struck coins, go into circulation. They travel through hands and cash registers and piggy banks and coin rolls, and most of them get spent and lost and worn down to nothing. But a few, just a tiny, precious few, are saved. Maybe someone liked the way a particular nickel looked. Maybe a child put it aside in a little box. Maybe a collector noticed something slightly unusual and tucked it away without fully understanding what they had found. And decades later, that coin surfaces. It gets submitted to a grading service. The experts examine it under powerful magnification. They confirm the variety. They assign the grade. And suddenly, a coin that left the San Francisco Mint worth 5 cents is being discussed in terms of millions upon millions of dollars. This is not mythology. This is the real, documented, verifiable history of rare coin collecting in America, and the 1968 Jefferson 5 cents sits at the very peak of that history. If there is a single coin that embodies everything extraordinary, everything unpredictable, everything humbling about the world of numismatics, it is this one. The lesson of a 1968 Jefferson nickel is a lesson about attention, about patience, about the willingness to look at something ordinary and ask whether it might be extraordinary. Most people will never do that. Most people will spend their nickels without a second glance, and that is fine. That is what money is for. But for the few who pause, who look closely, who take the time to learn and to search and to submit their finds to the right people, the rewards can be beyond anything they ever imagined. So the next time you receive change, the next time you find an old jar of coins in a closet or a box of change in an estate sale, do not rush. Look at the date. Look at the mint mark. Look at the steps on Monticello. Look at the alignment of the design. Look at the surface for doubling or errors. You might be holding 5 cents, or you might be holding $116 million. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end of this video. And if you found this fascinating, please subscribe, and share this with someone who checks their coins, because somewhere out there, one of these coins is waiting to be found, and it might just be waiting for you.